On March 14, 2019, a woman named Sarah Pemberton walked into a police station in Portland, Maine, carrying a shoebox. Her hands were shaking. Her face was pale, streaked with tears that had dried hours before. When the officer asked what was inside, she placed the box on the counter and stepped back. She wouldn't touch it again. Inside was a porcelain doll, no more than 12 inches tall, with blonde ringlets and glass eyes that seemed to follow movement even when perfectly still. Sarah told the officer the same thing she'd been whispering to herself for 3 days straight. The doll had killed her husband. And she could prove it. But what the officer didn't know, what Sarah herself had only just discovered, was that this doll had killed before. Many times before. And it had been waiting in that antique shop for someone exactly like her to find it. In 1987, a family named the Hendersons moved into a Victorian home on Ashwood Lane in Savannah, Georgia. The house had been empty for 6 years. The previous owners had left in the middle of the night, abandoning most of their belongings, including furniture, photographs, and in the corner of a small bedroom on the second floor, a collection of antique dolls. Mrs. Henderson thought they were charming. She cleaned them carefully, dusted their painted faces, and arranged them on a shelf in her daughter Emma's room. Emma was 7 years old. She didn't like the dolls. Especially the one with the cracked porcelain face and black button eyes. She told her mother it watched her sleep. Mrs. Henderson laughed it off as childhood imagination. 3 weeks later, Emma stopped sleeping entirely. Dark circles formed under her eyes. She began whispering to herself in a language her parents didn't recognize. When they asked her what she was saying, she would only stare at them with an expression far too old for her face. On the night of October 12, Emma's father heard footsteps in the hallway. Small footsteps. The sound of something light moving across wooden floorboards. When he opened his bedroom door, he saw Emma standing at the top of the stairs, holding the doll with the cracked face. She was smiling. But it wasn't Emma's smile. Her father took one step toward her, and she whispered 5 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life: "She wants you to come closer." The next morning, Emma had no memory of the night before. But the doll was no longer on the shelf. It was sitting on her father's pillow. Facing the door. Waiting. In Key West, Florida, there exists a doll more infamous than any other. His name is Robert. He belonged to a boy named Robert Eugene Otto, who received the doll in 1906 from a Bahamian servant who practiced black magic. The doll was made in the boy's image, with a sailor suit and a mischievous expression frozen on its stuffed face. Robert Eugene loved the doll. He took it everywhere. He spoke to it constantly. And according to his parents, the doll spoke back. At night, they would hear 2 voices coming from their son's room. One was Robert Eugene's. The other was deeper, raspier, tinged with something that made their skin crawl. When they burst into the room, they would find their son cowering in the corner, pointing at the doll and screaming that Robert did it. Furniture was overturned. Toys were broken. Once, the curtains had been shredded as if by tiny hands. The doll would be sitting upright on the bed, its button eyes gleaming in the lamplight. The family tried to get rid of Robert multiple times. They locked him in the attic. But Robert Eugene would wake up screaming until they brought the doll back. As an adult, Robert Eugene kept the doll. He built it a room in the turret of his home. Visitors reported seeing the doll move from window to window when no one was upstairs. Children walking past the house claimed Robert waved at them. When Robert Eugene died in 1974, the doll was discovered in the attic, sitting in a child-sized rocking chair. To this day, Robert resides in the Fort East Martello Museum. Visitors who photograph him without permission report accidents, illnesses, and a string of inexplicable misfortunes. The museum receives letters weekly, begging Robert's forgiveness. The doll never responds. But those who've looked closely at the photographs say his expression changes. Just slightly. As if he's smiling at something only he can see. In the spring of 2003, a young couple named David and Rachel Moreno purchased a vintage porcelain doll from an estate sale in Charleston, South Carolina. The doll was exquisite, dressed in a miniature wedding gown with intricate lace and tiny pearls sewn into the fabric. The woman running the sale seemed eager to be rid of it. She sold it for $5 and refused to make eye contact when Rachel asked about its history. Rachel placed the doll on a shelf in their bedroom. That night, David woke to the sound of weeping. Soft, muffled sobs coming from somewhere inside the room. He assumed Rachel was crying and reached for her, but she was sound asleep. The weeping continued. It seemed to come from the shelf. From the doll. The next morning, Rachel noticed something strange. The doll's position had changed. Its head was turned toward the bed. She was certain it had been facing forward the night before. David dismissed it. But over the following weeks, the occurrences escalated. The doll would appear in different rooms. They would leave it in the bedroom and find it in the kitchen, sitting at the table. Once, Rachel discovered it in the bathroom, perched on the edge of the sink, its painted eyes staring at the mirror. Then the accidents began. David fell down the stairs and broke his wrist. Rachel's car brakes failed on the highway. A fire started in their kitchen from an appliance that hadn't been turned on. Each time, the doll was nearby, watching. Rachel finally demanded they get rid of it. David agreed. He drove 20 miles out of town and threw the doll into a ravine. When he returned home, Rachel was standing in the doorway, pale and trembling. The doll was back. Sitting on their bed. Still wearing the wedding dress. Still staring. They moved out of the house 3 days later, leaving the doll behind. The new owners lasted 2 months before they abandoned the property entirely. The doll remains there still, in the empty house on Wentworth Street, waiting in the darkness for someone new to find her. In 1991, a woman donated a doll to the Canal Museum in British Columbia, Canada. She included a note that explained she could no longer keep the doll in her home. It was causing too many disturbances. The doll's name was Mandy. She was made in the 1920s, with a cracked porcelain head and hollow, vacant eyes. The woman claimed that at night, she would hear the sound of a baby crying coming from her basement, where Mandy was stored. When she went to investigate, the crying would stop. But she could feel something watching her from the shadows. The museum accepted Mandy and placed her in a display case. Within days, the staff began reporting strange phenomena. Cameras would malfunction near Mandy's exhibit. Fully charged batteries would drain instantly. Visitors complained of feeling watched, of sudden drops in temperature, of an overwhelming sense of sadness and dread when they stood too close to the glass. Objects in nearby displays would fall without explanation. Lights would flicker. And at night, after the museum closed, security guards reported hearing the sound of footsteps in the empty halls. Small footsteps. The footsteps of a child. One guard quit after he reviewed security footage from a particularly active night. The footage showed Mandy's display case in the darkness. For hours, nothing moved. Then, at 3:17 a.m., there was a flicker. A shadow passed in front of the case. But there was no one in the building. No one alive, at least. Mandy remains on display to this day. Museum staff refuse to be alone with her. Visitors still report strange occurrences, nausea, headaches, and the persistent feeling that something is following them long after they leave. And those who look closely at Mandy's face claim that her expression has changed over the years. That the blank, dead stare has become something else. Something aware. Something that knows you're looking back. There is a doll that has no name. No museum houses it. No documentation exists. But those who know of it speak in whispers, and they never speak for long. The doll was discovered in 2008 during the demolition of an abandoned orphanage in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was found sealed inside a wall, wrapped in cloth that had rotted to threads. The construction workers who found it reported an immediate sense of wrongness. The air in the room grew cold. The smell of decay, thick and cloying, filled their lungs. One worker touched the doll. His hand recoiled as if burned. He said later that the porcelain felt warm. Alive. The doll was approximately 14 inches tall, with jet black hair and eyes that were not painted but embedded, real glass that seemed to hold depth, as if you could fall into them. Its mouth was slightly open, revealing tiny teeth. Human teeth. The foreman ordered the doll to be thrown away. It was placed in a dumpster behind the site. The next morning, it was sitting on the front seat of the foreman's truck. He had locked the doors. No windows were broken. He tried to burn it. The doll would not catch fire. He tried to bury it. It reappeared in his home. He tried to smash it with a hammer. The porcelain would not crack. Finally, in desperation, he drove to a church and begged the priest to take it. The priest agreed. He locked the doll in the basement of the church, behind a door marked with holy symbols. That night, the priest heard knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks coming from below. When he opened the basement door, the doll was standing at the top of the stairs. Waiting. The church burned down 1 week later. The fire investigators found no cause. But in the ashes, untouched and pristine, was the doll. No one knows where it is now. Some say it was taken by a collector. Others say it simply vanished. But there are reports. Every few years, a doll matching the description appears in an antique shop, a yard sale, and estate auction. And whoever takes it home finds that some things should remain buried. Some things should never be found. Sarah Pemberton's doll, the one she brought to the police station in that shoebox, was never logged into evidence. The officer who took her statement denies ever seeing it. But Sarah remembers. She remembers the weight of the box in her hands. She remembers the way the doll's eyes followed her as she backed away. And she remembers what the doll whispered to her the night her husband died. The same thing it had whispered to every owner before her. The same thing it will whisper to its next victim. I've been waiting for you. If you've ever brought something old into your home, something you found at an estate sale or an antique shop, something that felt like it chose you rather than the other way around, pay attention. Because some dolls are more than porcelain and paint. Some dolls are doorways. And once you open that door, it never truly closes again.